Okay, so you'll let me know when you want me to share the camera and the webcam.
Yes,
Okay, all right, well, it's 4:25, so I'm here as promised.
thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed your day as we come to our final general session of the day. We are glad you're here with us in this virtual environment for our 2023 Optimal Aging Conference. Again, we want to take time to let our sponsors and exhibitors know how much we appreciate their support. We also want to show great appreciation to our Optimal Aging Conference Planning Committee and staff. I'm so excited about this general session and know that each of you will enjoy our keynote presenter. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joseph D'Ambrosio as he comes in with a welcome and an introduction of our general session presenter, Dr. Kim Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Yeshua. I'm honored to introduce my colleague, friend, and most importantly, my cardiologist, Dr. Kim Williams. We're lucky to have him at U of L, and our community really benefits by his presence here. Dr. Williams is the chairperson of the Department of Internal Medicine at the University of Louisville. He specializes in cardiology, cardionutrition, cardiorheumatology, cardio-nephrology, preventative cardiology, and cardiovascular radiology. He is the past president of the American College of Cardiology, past president of the American Society of Nuclear Cardiology, and former chairman of the board of directors of the Association of Black Cardiologists. He is also the founder of the Urban Cardiology Initiative in Detroit, Michigan, to reduce ethnic heart care disparities, and continues community-based efforts in Chicago at Rush, including the H.E.A.R.T. program, helping everyone assess risk today, screening for heart disease, and intervening with education, nutrition, and lifestyle changes. He has been a delegate for cardiology to the American Medical Association for over 20 years and has served as a consultant for the FDA and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. His current professional focus is on preventative cardiology, specializing in synthesizing data on cardiovascular risk and mortality due to nutrition. He's an internationally recognized speaker, including over 600 publications, online resources, movies, lectures, and most recently on the topic of cardio nutrition. You can find him on YouTube, which I love to watch. He's the founding editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention, a native of Chicago's South Side's Inner City School, and former professional tennis player and national tennis coach. Dr. Williams has over 40 years of experience as an educator, researcher, and physician focused on nutrition, national and international healthcare disparities, healthcare delivery, and advanced cardiac imaging. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for all you do, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate all of the hard work that goes in. I'm not sure the audience understands how much hard work everyone actually does at Traeger to put this on. It's pretty amazing, and it was fun to watch. I do love this camera of a camera of a camera of a camera, but I'm actually going to give my talk instead of staring at the artwork. My task this afternoon is to talk about nutrition, health equity, some COVID-19, and cardiovascular mortality. And the subtitle or superscript really would be Dueling the Dual Pandemic that we're in. We learned a lot of lessons, which I'm going to share with you. Joe, I have a special favor. Is it possible to unmute the entire audience? I don't think it is, but I wanted to do a quiz after all this hard work today that people are doing. Probably not possible, huh?
So the attendees cannot unmute, but everybody in this room can talk to you.
Okay, so, well, anyway, I'm going to do the quiz anyway. Okay. Does anybody know what this is? And why is a cardiologist talking about this? I know I've become a Department of Medicine chair, and it makes me more than just cardiovascular disease, but
Leprosy.
I guess we can't do the audience analysis.
It's leprosy.
But I'm sure there's someone in the audience. I'm sorry, what was that?
Leprosy.
Somebody answered? Close. Okay. And I actually don't have data on leprosy, but I imagine it would be exactly the same as what I'm going to tell you. All right, this is actually smallpox. And you saw that was a black hand. And the reason that I showed that is that there's been a lot of discussion of racial disparities in healthcare. They are not new. And it's interesting that Benjamin Franklin, who had a good pulpit, everyone knew who he was, and he published a lot of things. He actually popularized the notion that Blacks had a higher mortality rate from smallpox, and even after inoculation for smallpox, there still was a black-white difference. And so how did you get rid of those black-white differences? How did you go from how bad it was in 1721 to 1764, or even now? How did it happen? Well, a lot of it was the inoculation, and that was started by an African-American slave. And he actually was taken from West Africa, and he understood that smallpox outbreaks could be quelled by injecting people with pus of someone who was infected. And so giving a small dose conferred some immunity. And unfortunately, some people died with the vaccine, but so many lives were saved, particularly in that Boston epidemic because of an African-American slave. Saved massive number of lives. So this one might be a little bit harder to recognize. But the one thing you can see about this historical slide is that most of the faces that you see are very dark, and indeed they are. It's mostly Black people. And so if you're a student of history, you figured this out. That's the digging of the Panama in the 19th century. They gave it up because it was a huge who was dying from yellow fever. And what happened was eradication of it. The discovery, mostly because of the experience. Walter Reed, U.S. Army surgeon, they figured it out because the Spanish-American War, more soldiers died from yellow fever than anything else. And so how did they figure it out? Once they figured out that it was the female mosquito, that all you needed to do was do mosquito abatement, and it actually worked. So this wonderful team of people convinced the government to go back where France had given up, dig the Panama Canal, connect the world east and west, and the entire world has profited from their efforts. Okay, fast forward another century. Everyone knows who this is. Everyone understands that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had polio. What you may not understand is that there were huge racial disparities, not just in the disease, because it was transmitted mostly oral and fecal, more fecal than oral. And if you lived close to someone, and there was opportunity for great sanitation, you were more likely to get this disease. The biggest problem with it wasn't just the getting of the disease, it was the management of the disease, trying to get people to survive. And there was a huge racial and political issue with folks like Franklin Delano Roosevelt starting rehabilitation centers that Blacks were not allowed to go into. And that was fought by Eleanor Roosevelt to try to make it a little bit more equanimity. But they put up a lot of places for people to recover. The ultimate answer was to get rid of the disease. And so that happened gradually with the Salk vaccine. And then by 1964, there were 2 more vaccines. And we had solve all the social, make it so that you live long enough to try to solve some of the social ills because you got rid of the disease. So fast forward another century, and here we are with COVID-19, people of color, particularly Blacks, having more death. And we have much better medical systems now than we did in the 50s or previous centuries. But we still have these racial healthcare disparities. We still have people who live in tight spaces, and when they get COVID, they can't isolate as well. And so you ended up with all of the socioeconomic differences and our underlying risk, which was pointed out by Haywood from Ochsner in New England Journal of Medicine, that a massive number of Black people were dying down there in New Orleans. But when you did a careful analysis, Black race was not associated with the higher hospitalized mortality than the white race. It was the fact that they had more risk factors. So if COVID goes after the obese, goes after hypertensive, goes after people who have high cholesterol, and your Black race has more of those things, you're going to see those deaths. And so being poorer, all of the above. And when you adjust for medical or clinical characteristics and socioeconomics, if anything, Black race was a hair protective. That was probably a statistical quirk, but I have to say that we did that analysis at Rush. They scooped us, so theirs got published, ours didn't. Medical thing. Black race was not, it was risk, not race. I'm here to talk about nutrition, and I want to propose to you that this is, of all the things in medicine that you've talked about today and that you'll do in your practice, that this is the most important thing that we can talk terms of health equity. Excuse me. Many of you have actually seen this slide, the difference between equality, everybody a leg up, and equity, where you give more to the people who need more. But you may not have seen the takeoff of it, which is reality. And I wish that this were not true, that the shorter person, that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, but that is the way things are. So I want to propose to you a fourth, which I saw, and it was so apropos to what I'm talking about today. And for polio, and now COVID, with our vaccines and our big programs to try to get people to not die from this disease. But what is the best thing that we can do for cardiovascular disease, which is my topic today? It's justice, and that is remove the disease, because this is a disease that never needs to exist, and I'm hopefully going to show you that. What are we talking about? We're talking about a person in the United States dying every 36 seconds, that it's extremely expensive, and that fifth bullet point is really important. Over half of all African American adults have some form of cardiovascular disease, and it results in a 21% higher cardiovascular mortality rate. Please remember that. There'll be a quiz. All right. Now, done. Arrhythmia control, you name it, we did it. And then around 2015, right when I got up in front of 5,000 people as president of the American College of Cardiology and said, I'm not giving up cardiology until we are number 2, because I thought it was going to happen the next few years. And instead, it actually started going the opposite direction. It plateaued, and then it started to rise. And we're still having more people of color having our cardiovascular. We are not doing well. The number one cause of poor health around this country is actually dietary risk. And I hope you're all taking this very seriously and totally engaged, because it affects us. It's in fact the leading cause of death of physicians and in fact cardiologists is still heart disease, and that is from dietary risk. How does it affect our nation? We have so much overweight and obesity and diabetes in our teenagers that we have very, very poor levels of military readiness, and we're spending a massive amount of money. So almost 1/5 of our gross domestic product is spent on healthcare. But 80% of those healthcare dollars are spent on preventable chronic diseases that are related to nutrition and lifestyle. And so we have an opportunity to change all of that, but we have to have the determination. So I'll show you some of the data. Here it is. Life expectancy in the United States is going down. You've heard that. But you may not have seen our healthcare expenditure per capita. It's huge compared to other nations that are advanced nations. And in fact, these are all high-income countries. The United States is the only high-income country that still has cardiovascular disease as the leading killer. And as I mentioned, ever since about 2015, it's been going up. If you look at heart failure, overall cardiovascular disease, plateaued and then starts to rise. And that is because of, it isn't because of lack of cardiology or technology. It's because all that we are doing in cardiology is shown on this slide. We are mopping up the floor instead of turning off the faucet. And so if we don't get upstream and start to deal with the underlying root causes of cardiovascular disease, we can develop all that we want, and the disease always go ahead and catch up with us. Okay, so let me fast forward to COVID-19. This is an opportunity to have a virus, as I mentioned, is going to go after people with risk. It's going to affect blood vessels and going to increase the mortality of people who have underlying vascular disease already. And when you look at what's going to happen in the United States post-COVID, it doesn't look good. So this was published a few months ago. Central illustration, you might actually be able to see this, but I'm going to simplify it for you. Bottom line is, the projection are that if things keep going as they are, extracting from the 2020 census, diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, and obesity are all going to increase, and they have the results that you expect. More coronary artery disease, more heart attack, more heart failure, more strokes. And guess what? They're all based on these projections going to go down in the white population, but will increase in the racial minorities. The graphs that they showed look scary, but you know what? They don't have to happen. Those are projections. Those projections can be changed if people are determined to go backwards in terms of the pathophysiology and uproot all of the underlying causes. So what are the causes? I'm hopefully going to convince you that it's nutrition and that we're doing a bad job, and that even though our federal guidelines, which are a bit weakened by a lot of commercial influence, but even they will say 2 to 3 cups of fruits and vegetables per day, and 90% of Americans do not do that. So we end up with obesity. So look at the dark states. Kentucky is one of them, where more than 35% of the people are actually obese. But if you isolate the white population, still Kentucky, but it's only a handful of states. If you expand that to the Hispanic population, the number of states almost triples. And if you look at the African American population, sure, there are a couple of states that just don't have data reporting, but it's almost the entire United States where African Americans have this obesity issue. What is it? It's fast food. It's what's marketed. And we end up with this triple whammy of obesity, diabetes, and sleep disordered breathing. I hope everyone heard that Life Simple 7, that the way to do prevention by the American Heart Association, had sleep added to it a few months ago. So it's Life Essential 8. We really need to focus on it. And if you take away the obesity, the sleep disordered breathing dramatically improves. And it's not just us. Obesity is increasing worldwide. We need to take stock of all of the information that's been published, such as the REGARDS trial, that looks at all of the risk factors and the reasons for geographic and racial differences in stroke. And this is what they found. That red line is the Southern diet. That's a nice way of saying soul food. More fried food, greens are good, but when you put fat back in the greens, it's not so good. Tea is good, but if it's sweetened tea, not so good. And the results of that so-called Southern diet is more heart disease, more chronic kidney disease. We are 12% of the population, and we're 35% of the dialysis patients. And of course, more stroke. So the real thing that we need to do is go back and do this plant-based diet can be our justice. What do we have to undo? Well, we've got a lot of work to do to try to make this better. This is a study that we published when I was at Rush, talking about marketing and looking at television commercials. And the largest amount of commercials were actually fast food. And when you put it on a healthy versus unhealthy scoring system, they are unhealthy. The refined grain in the hamburger bun, the hamburger itself, the cheese on top of it, you marketing things, and of course you're selling that hamburger with French fries, excuse me, sweetened beverage, and they're very large in calories, and they increase diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, and all of the diseases. Even the brand named individual items that are being marketed have a net negative score. Our grocery chains, the food that they're depicting that you can buy, have a net negative score. And even home delivered meals, when you see them advertised, they're still showing things that people like, but they're not healthy. But none of them are as bad as fast food. So what should we do? You know, we have commercial ban on cigarettes. Why aren't we putting a commercial ban on unhealthy food? Show fruits and vegetables when you're advertising for grocery. Nuts, grains, beans. Why not do that? Well, obviously, it's a big commercial thing to take on, and we just don't have it. But other countries have. They ban advertising of unhealthy food to children. We need to do it. Why is it such a problem? This is a University of Chicago study that is just stunning. When we're talking about television commercials being bad for you, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about affecting poor people more than wealthy. Very few people who have a household income 150,000 or more watch more than 5 hours of television per day. But it's a large segment of the people who are poor. So we're marketing. The marketing does work. We're hitting the people with it, and they're eating the things that make them sick. I would be food deserts. I just want to say, I'm not a big believer in this. People say, yeah, healthy food is not sold in local stores. That is true. To Kentucky said that, well, we have a food apartheid, East End versus West End. I work in the West End. I live in the East End. It's true. I don't think we should call it a swamp, because swamps are actually good things. But what I want to convince you of is that we're misspelling food desert. There should be another S. It's a food dessert. That is, unhealthy food is preferred by customers. Our grocery stores are not in the healthcare business. They're in the please make a profit, please don't go out of business. And so we are the problem, not the grocery stores. We need to educate people, need to have people like Dr. D'Ambrosio doing behavior modification, getting people to understand what's healthy, and then going out and asking the grocers stores to carry it, and then buying it so it doesn't rot on the shelves. That's our issue. So why am I showing a Hostess Twinkie? Well, because it really is a good example of what the kind of unhealthy food that's inexpensive because of industry support by our congressional tax dollars. It turns out that the Hostess Twinkie has 14 ingredients that are subsidized by the government. We should not be subsidizing things like high fructose corn syrup that will actually ruin the health of the population. So then we can run out of money with Medicare every year. We need to do better. So I'm going to talk specifically about the risk factors and diseases that go into our concerns about how we can make this better with nutrition. Show you exactly what the data is. I'm going to talk about it from 5 different areas: the obesity, diabetes and blood sugar, the blood pressure, cholesterol, and inflammation. Very good data for a long time. Many people are doing trials on obesity. What they aren't able to reproduce is the longevity of an intervention that where the weight goes down and it stays off. And the Ornish, which is one way of doing it, actually does have good data for longevity of the effect. How about blood pressure? Absolutely have massive amounts of data, multiple trials where you take someone who's on an omnivorous diet, they're eating everything, make them vegan, and get a dramatic decrease in their blood pressure. We have randomized trials such as the DASH that says even in DASH, lowering the sodium, improving the potassium ratio, and getting a drop in blood pressure. But that drop in blood pressure is better if you're on a low fat and low cholesterol, preferably no fat, no cholesterol, which is actually a plant-based diet. You get the most dramatic drop in the blood pressure. How about cholesterol? So many people have heard that cholesterol doesn't really matter. It's your genes, it's your family. No. And when you do a prospective intervention of a plant-based diet, versus an animal-laden diet. When you stop eating cholesterol, your blood cholesterol will improve. The data is very clear. One of the best studies of this that I always will remember, because it came out the day in 2003 that I found out that I had elevated cholesterol. I quit being a national coach in tennis. It wasn't playing tennis twice a day anymore because my kid aged out of junior tennis. Well, it turns out that my LDL cholesterol dramatically dropped when I went vegan within a matter of weeks. And this study told me exactly what was going to happen if I did a whole food plant-based diet with a lot of fiber. And the drop in LDL was equal to the drop that you get. It was normal. And then when I went vegan, it went absent simply because a whole food plant-based diet lowers inflammation. So that was actually proven more recently, published by F.A.H.A out of NYU. The randomized trial to the older AM Association changed the guidelines for the American Heart Association and to show them to, but this one had animal product. But also but it was hard to digest decaying flesh without it producing some level of inflammation, as opposed to a whole food plant-based diet, which lowers inflammation, as clearly shown by Dr. F.A.H.A. Now, more recent data that took 3 large trials that had toward the recent late-breaking clinical trial by Paul Ridker. And what he basically showed is that your major adverse cardiac events were dramatically reduced if you had the lower C-reactive protein. And your cardiovascular death was lower as well if you had the elevated C-reactive protein. It does a stunning thing from their Lancet paper that we think we're doing well when we get our LDL down below 70. Great. Not true if the inflammation is still there. So you can do a lot of stuff to improve your cholesterol, but the best thing you can do is to get rid of both cholesterol and LDL cholesterol. And so that's the summary of that article by Paul Ridker. It's very clear that all 3 trials, people with an elevated high sensitivity C-reactive protein were at high cardiovascular risk, regardless of LDL cholesterol. And so I know Paul, great player, forehand a little better than the backhand. Well, his entire career on this C-reactive protein and talking canakinumab or using methotrexate or using drugs and saying, Paul, just stop eating animals for every person and their residual inflammatory risk will go down. So I've told you really what we could do about those risk factors. Now I'm going to tell you why. And it is the microbiome. And so the overview is the stunning thing that many people haven't heard. I hope you all Google microbiome, particularly gastrointestinal microbiome, and read all about it, because I'll give you a brief introduction here. But believe it or not, most of your body is not actually human. Human cells only make up 43% of the cell count. And the rest are the microbiome, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, viruses. They do a variety of physiologic and metabolic activity, particularly in the GI. I know this is a cardiology talk, but so many of our patients, as we're talking about an aging conference, and the Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease keep piling up. Well, the data is very clear that they are related to a dysbiotic microbiome. And if you were not having this leaky gut of bad chemicals coming out of your GI tract, your neurologic system would stay intact. We can do better in terms of fecal microbiome transplantation. Probiotics have not worked, but that has to be some hope. We have to get something that'll get through gastric acidity or keep giving it through an enema. But how about just change the diet? A whole food plant-based diet fixes your microbiome in a large way very rapidly. So the data very quickly on the classic 5 risk factors that I'm talking about today, the data is massive. Here's hypertension. And multiple trials all showing the same thing. It's not just your genes. It's not just your environment. It's not just your sodium. It's actually how much of alpha diversity, that is good bacteria of multiple species, you have in your GI tract, and avoiding the ones that happen more when you're eating an animal-based diet that's low in fiber. These bacteria, if they're in your GI tract, they're associated with a higher blood pressure. How about hypercholesterolemia? Most of us have not heard of cholesterol dehydrogenase or the ISMA gene or the caprosenol, which results from dehydrogenation of cholesterol. Fact of the matter is, if you have the good bacteria, you have more of this gene, and you metabolize more of your carboxynol. So when I was showing you that meta-analysis of cholesterol improvement with plant-based intervention, we thought it was just that you stopped your dietary cholesterol and that was improving things. It's true, but that wasn't the only thing. It was actually metabolism, because your microbiome got better, it healed up, and you were able to take what cholesterol you were making, because you are making cholesterol and it's absorbed in the intestine, but not before those bacteria to actually get rid of some of it. And so this is another mechanism that we need to take advantage of. The diabetes, it's kind of difficult to summarize because all of the literature shows these massive graphs, because it's a massive amount of data. I'm sure it's been a few days since I did this slide, or a few weeks. It's not 42 studies anymore. This is a very active area. People know which bacteria in your GI tract will prevent diabetes and which ones will actually increase diabetes. And I really shout out to Dr. Gurung at Oregon State. But putting out, it looks really complicated, but if you stare at it for a minute, it actually isn't that complicated. We're talking about gut permeability. We're talking about fatty acid oxidation, glucose, insulin, homeostasis, and inflammation. The blue ones are with the arrows are the ones, the bacteria that have been found to make things better. And they all map to a specific mechanism. And then you have bacteria that make them worse. And so this is an opportunity for us to change that we're facing. And same thing is true of obesity. And they run together just like they do, so much so that we're calling it diabesity. Probably shouldn't even make two sections about it because they overlap so much. If you have the good microbiome, you can actually improve your short chain fatty acid biosynthesis and bacterial lipopolysaccharides. And what you end up with is a very simple idea. Put the right bacteria in the GI tract, even if it's done with fecal transplantation. I, of course, would prefer to do it with a whole food plant-based diet. But you can take the feces and give it by enema from an obese person to a thin person, and that person will gain weight. But you also could do the reverse. And so thin vegan poop pills are likely to come out marketing. They already have poop pills for Clostridium difficile, but we should be treating a lot of disorders by changing the microbiome. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about a chemical that you may or may not have heard of. It's called TMAO, trimethylamine N oxide. And the reason to talk about it is that it's essentially a derivative of bad diet. This is 10 years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was real simple back then. You eat cheese, eggs, meat. It puts phosphatidylcholine, choline, beta-ine, and creatine into your GI tract, where your gut flora, the microbiome, starts attacking those compounds and turns them into trimethylamine. Your liver then oxidizes that to trimethylamine N oxide, and that is a compound that either causes or is associated with heart attack, stroke, and death, more clotting, more plaque development. It's much more complicated now. This was published a couple of years ago rather than 10 years ago. And TMAO pathways are all over the body, all over the blood vessel system. They affect the brain, they affect the kidney, and we need to pay close attention to our TMAO levels. If we change our diet, particularly away from red meat, you will see a dramatic improvement within 4 weeks of your TMAO levels. And you could actually go on. You just try it. Don't do red meat, do white meat, do non-meat, that is plant protein from beans, grains, nuts, and seeds. And what you'll see is a dramatic drop in your TMAO level. And you can wash out and then go back and raise it again with red meat. I don't know why you would, but you can because it correlates very much with that. So how about the factors that are associated with
Please hold as Dr. Williams tries to
He can't
reconnect.
see. He don't know he's gone. Erica needs to. He's gone.
Take on this risk
There he
of
is.
increased mortality, even small amounts.
So Dr.
The risk is for coronary artery
I'm gonna-
disease, shown multiple times, and you've got the pretty much any protein substitute. Notably in this study, fish didn't work, but pretty much any substitute for red meat will actually improve your outcome. There's a unique association between red meat, processed and unprocessed, and heart failure, with a 243% increase if you're eating the usual amount of processed red meat, into 243% increase mortality. And so the opposite is true as well. This is analysis of the regards trial I showed you before with the Southern diet. They also looked at plant and even exclusively plant-based. It was just more plants. And that dietary pattern was associated with a 41% lower risk of heart failure. And why? It's because of the vegan and vegetarian diets improve the microbiome, as I've been talking about. You are able to promote the diverse ecosystem that's beneficial to promote health instead of disease. Now, I'm going to call out a couple of different sources of data that everybody should be aware of, because it's not just red meat. Eggs is actually dangerous as well. I know Don Lloyd Jones article that was published in JAMA, in a linear relationship between egg consumption and mortality. And there's barely a half an egg is actually considered safe, half an egg a day. They said, no, that's just Americans. There's just too much disease. It's not real. Well, the Italians did the same kind of analysis. They didn't find half an egg a day. They got 4 eggs a week. Wait a minute. That's about a half an egg a day. And even 2 eggs per week, 2 to 4, was associated with an increased all-cause mortality. So, and it's cancer and cardiovascular disease. There was similar data published out of China that showed very similarly, the more eggs you eat, the more mortality that you have. It's not alone. So yes, there's data on eggs and processed and red meat, but there's also data on what we consider healthier meat. That is your TMAO level. And that's, they raise inflammation. And so this was a very famous article from the Harvard group. Note the title, Animal Protein versus Plant Protein and Mortality. They included doctors and nurses who had at least one cardiovascular risk factor, and this is what it showed. There are no safe animal products for human consumption if you have any cardiovascular risk factors. Some are better than others, obviously. And poultry have less impact on mortality than dairy. Dairy is better than red meat. Meat is better than eggs, and egg is better than processed red meat. Interestingly enough, cardiovascular disease went with that very similarly, stronger effect of red meat than eggs for cardiovascular, but overall mortality, eggs were worse than red meat. Okay, and you might be wondering if I just went backwards because it's the same title. No, this is actually 3 years later, and it's actually from Japan. Same title, same model. They looked at their own data, and what they found is pretty much the same. That is, there are no safe animal products. Replacing your animal protein with plant protein improves your mortality. They really published the same title a third time. They really did. But this is back in the United States, not the Harvard group, but U.S. National Peace Study. Very clear. It was the same analysis of substitution of what would happen if you got rid of just 3% of your animal protein and put in vegetable protein. And what they did is just show you the hazard ratios graphically, numerically, and all animal protein put together. You were avoiding pretty much all of the diseases. If you pull out the red meat, same thing. Pull out the eggs, same thing. So if you want to avoid mortality, you stop eating animal protein and start eating plants, and do that for our patients as well. That has been actually shown in prospective studies as well. That is processed red meat, eggs, unprocessed red meat, dairy products, all of them increase all-cause mortality. When we look at, and the graphs are actually pretty vascular disease. Now, about just what we're actually asking folks to do, which is to just change your diet. And that we're actually, there's a wonderful article, if you want to pull it up, talking about what are our challenges. It's lack of knowledge, lack of availability, there's the pricing, time scarcity, so people go for fast food. There's so many things that stop Joe D'Ambrosio from being able to change people. But I'm hoping he's successful, because our trials and our interventions are going to be depending on how we can change these factors and get people to engage in diet and lifestyle. But very clearly, very strong that if you want to decrease mortality, you start doing way more in terms of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and whole grains. Now, when to talk about this in detail, there's another area that I need to cover, and that is the idea of a low-carb diet. People have been doing this to lose weight and improve diabetes. It does work. The problem is that it increases death, unless you do it with plants. So a plant-based keto diet decreases mortality by 18%. Animal-based keto diet increases death by 18%. This is that famous Seidelman curve showing bad outcomes if you have a higher diet, and that's because of refined carbohydrates, but also bad outcome, worse outcome if you do a very much keto diet. What's wrong with refined grains? Well, sugar increases mortality. And so you need to keep it way below 10% of total calories. And there's a fair amount of refined grain literature. I'm just going to show you one that was talking about vegans, healthful versus unhealthful plant-based diet. And the fact of the matter is, if you are eating vegan beignets and vegan donuts and vegan ice cream, and refined line says your development disease is actually might not be better, and the animal itself won't be better, but your human life would actually be better. Get away from refined grains and sugar. So we actually have put all that data together for vegan restaurants, but our observation was that we were struggling finding healthful versus unhealthful plant-based meals. And the data, if you're a vegan restaurant, you had a better shot at having a health vegan options that were actually not very healthy. More fried food, saturated fat, high sodium, high sugar, and refined grains. So I want to talk a little bit about another pattern. We talked about keto. Another one that's very popular is Mediterranean. And U.S. News and World Report says it's the #1 diet for human health. I want to argue with that just a little bit, in that the data doesn't show that. It shows that, yeah, the 30% decrease in heart attack, stroke, and death that happened with the Mediterranean diet in the New England Journal of Medicine, when you blow it up and look at it, there actually a decrease in stroke that drove the endpoint. Was the same. Death from cardiovascular causes was the same. From any cause was the same. So cardiologists telling people to do a Mediterranean diet, I believe, isn't supported by this literature. There is some data in favor of it for secondary prevention, but for primary prevention, we don't have the data to do that. Now, what we have is almost the opposite. Same authors, same study, turning the data on its side. Pro-vegetarian Mediterranean diet, or a vegetarian diet, highest quintile of vegetable versus lowest quintile of vegetable consumption, 42% decrease in
Please hold. We're trying to contact Dr. Williams to see if he can join us.
Where is he? Where is he?
U of L IT.
Oh my God.
because the red meat contributes the trimethylamine N oxide. And so poor long-term survival, get rid of the red meat, get rid of and go to plant-based diet. And the data is really, these are not, vegan propaganda journals. These are wonderful, good data in peer-reviewed literature saying, stop feeding people with chronic kidney disease animal protein. No question that you get rid of the complications. Nephroprotection, particularly with soy protein, but the data is very clear that any kind of vegetable protein is safe. You're going to get less left ventricular hypertrophy, better blood pressure, improvement in your GFR, on and on. And so the National Kidney Foundation put this out, largely ignored, unfortunately, by physicians and by nephrologists, saying, go vegan, basically, anyone who has chronic kidney disease. I am going to touch on COVID again because we should have had this data out right at the beginning because we knew the risk factors and we knew how to handle those risk factors, which is to go vegan. But what we didn't know was that COVID-19 was playing off of the immune response of the gut microbiome. And so cytokine storm, all the inflammation, it was because of COVID-19's, because of the microbiome and the COVID-19 effect on it. And then finally, unfortunately in 2021, this got published. It was striking data that if you had been a vegan or pesco vegetarian, you actually had a 73% decrease. It's a 59% decrease. Plant-based diet, 73% decrease in COVID-related moderate to severe illness. And if you were a keto person eating animal protein all the time, that actually you saw a dramatic increase in severity of COVID. And that really is because of the microbiome. So hopefully everybody understands we are not done with this. We're getting better, but we're not completely done with COVID. Everyone needs to be on a plant-based diet, at least until the end of it. Now I'm going to close out and then open up for questions in a few minutes, but I want to talk about the guidelines for the AHA that I mentioned. As one of the authors, we focus on these 8 different areas, but I'm going to focus on the diet. We should be eating vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains. American Heart about writing this section of the guideline because it was, quote, too vegetarian, and fish swam into my guidelines. Why? Well, it isn't because the fish board went after the AHA. No, it was really the fact that they are a stroke organization. And as I showed you, you don't die any less, you don't have less heart attacks, less cardiovascular death, but you do have less stroke when you take your red meat and change it to fish. But why not avoid all of it with a plant-based diet? Getting rid of your saturated fat, even if it's in coconut oil or palm oil, getting rid of cholesterol, which is in all animal products, lowering the sodium, no more processed meat, refined carbohydrates, or sugar-sweetened beverages. If you do that, all the data points to a longer life expectancy and less disease. If you do that, we will decrease the amount of healthcare expenditures. That was published a few months ago with a modeling of expenditures based on all the existing data. The better, if you start giving people healthy food, their healthcare expenditures will go down. Billions of dollars would be saved. Now, part of my task today was to talk about healthcare disparities, and I talked about it at the beginning. I'm going to end up with it as well. This is the data from Adventist house, take a Black person, a member of their congregation, and make them vegetarian. This is what happens. All of the risk goes down. Hypertension, high cholesterol, diabetes, elevated cholesterol. If you do it as a randomized intervention, which Baxter Montgomery did, what you see is dramatic improvement in hypertension and cholesterol. And there are other risk factors. And he went back and redid the study, those LP little a, triglyceride levels, ApoB, all the fancy lipid tests that we don't do very often. But the bottom line was all of them improved statistically. And so we have really good data that you can take Black people and make them healthier and remove that barrier and remove the cardiovascular disease blight that's been on our community for so many decades. So we've actually done this on the south side of Chicago, and we're hoping to do another one with the help of Traeger Institute on the west end of Louisville. I went into Obama's old church and did for Lent of 2019, we actually did the plant-based 5 weeks of intervention with vegan diet delivered to people's homes, and then measured all of those risk factors that you saw with Baxter Montgomery. And the result was very striking. TMAO, which Baxter didn't measure, but we got a hold of it, and it was a 43% decrease in your TMAO level. Insulin went down because the obesity went down. All of the cholesterol went down. Inflammation went down. There's only one diet that lowers TMAO, LDL cholesterol, and high sensitivity C-reactive protein, and that's a whole food plant-based diet. When we put our data into the A.C.C. risk calculator, we found very clearly that we were able to eliminate about 19% of that 21% increase that's estimated that African Americans have. We put that into a cookbook that you can just Google and download it and share with everybody. The Heart and Soul cookbook with Baxter Montgomery and myself. It was really my idea. He did all the work because he's actually a cook. But I wanted to share with you before closing one more little piece, and that is healthcare providers. This was a very courageous editorial by Sarah Hall, who said that it is a moral imperative of medical professionals to promote and really adopt a diet. That is why have the leading cause of death of cardiologists be heart disease when we know that we can prevent it, not just treat it. So how many doctors follow our guidelines? We actually have some data. It was sort of stunning to do a survey after 3 years after the guidelines had been published, saying what people should be eating, even allowing them for fish. The pesco-vegetarian and plant-based physicians, out of almost 300 physicians, 4% were eating a healthy diet. Everyone else was eating something that increased their mortality significantly, and the vast majority were doing an omnivore diet. It's the hospital food, it's the vending machines, it's the marketing, and it's the lack of physician education ourselves, and we harm our patients. And then there's medical meetings. I didn't see the food at Traeger Institute, but this is a meeting that I won't say the name of it, American Society of Preventive Cardiology. It was held in Louisville last year, and they were feeding the physicians processed meat and eggs. And so we have to do better. It's a moral imperative. So before I open up for questions, I just want to summarize that heart disease, kidney disease, stroke, all of these things are increasing, particularly in the minority population. They're driven by diet and lifestyle choices conferred by the microbiome that increase our health inequities and the exorbitant, unsustainable, toxic healthcare costs. A diet will actually reduce all of those risk factors, including the three major ones I talked about: LDL, C-reactive, and all of the diseases that result from a bad microbiome, obesity, hypertension, and the like. And then, of course, the actual outcome: peripheral artery disease, erectile dysfunction, coronary disease, heart attack, heart failure, chronic kidney disease, going on dialysis, stroke and death, all of which being mediated by the microbiome. So in this dual pandemic, we really need to be advocates for adopting and spreading word of risk factor reduction through lifestyle with plant-based nutrition. And with that, I'm going to unshare the screen and hopefully open it up for questions if we got some time. It looks like I have another 5 minutes. Let's see.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. I appreciate it. It sounds like this is another pandemic, but we're not calling it a pandemic. Why do you think that's so?
Well, some of us are, and that's why I was calling it the dual pandemic. It's heart disease, which was the majority of my talk, leading killer of Americans since 1918. It was taken out in 1918, by the way, taken out by the Spanish flu. For 1 year, though. Spanish flu was 3 years. Heart disease was back by 1919 as the leading killer of Americans. Been that way. If COVID had started here when it started in China, it would have taken out heart disease for that year. But it didn't. So people focusing, we spend so much effort on COVID, so much effort on cancer, and yet the fundamental issues that are causing the heart disease, that is the largest expense in our healthcare system and the underlying factors, we're not doing enough. We're treating it instead of getting rid of it.
What have you found in the studies that you've already done? What have you found that really helps people maintain a plant-based diet?
So I've said this to you before. We were so interested in the biochemistry and the microbiome and all of the stuff, and we were never behavioralists. That is what you are bringing to the table, and that's what Traeger does. I know we made a change on the south side of Chicago, but did we really make a difference? What I didn't show you was the follow-up data because that's buried in the manuscript. Everybody committed to 3 and 6 month follow-up. By 6 months, 1/3 of the people had really incorporated a predominantly plant-based diet. 1/3 of them said they had changed their diet a little bit, and 1/3 we never even heard from them again. Why is that? Because they went back. They got the 5 weeks of free food, proved that their risk factor were better, but then went back. That's cultural. When we try to change to a plant-based diet in the Black community, we're talking about attacking the family, the community, the church, the stores. We're attacking everything. And so we need large-scale changes. Some of it is actually coming from the White House Food and Nutrition and Hunger Summit that happened in September. We made a lot of recommendations like improving the SNAP program, getting rid of the congressional subsidies for bad food, taking those congressional subsidies and making it for good food. Finland did that, changed from dairies to berries, what they were paying farmers to produce, and their heart disease went way down. We could do the same thing. We just have to fight through the corporate entities that want to see the opposite happen.
Have you seen any shift towards restrictive advertising for youth? Or
none whatsoever. And I put that was in my big 7 requests of the White House, and I was so thrilled when Joe Biden got up to the microphone and said 6 of them. but changing the commercials was not on the agenda. I guess that's just too corporate.
Wow.
There's some in the chat. There's several.
Let me see what else is in the chat. So you say we should change. Is it really that easy just to change over to a plant-based diet?
So I can tell you, and I would almost defer to you on this, but I can tell you my experience as a clinician and as a person with an LDL. Now, I found out about my LDL in my late 40s. I'm Black, family history of a dad who had sudden cardiac death after dialysis of all things. Male. I knew I was at risk. And there's a huge advantage to doing cardiac catheterizations and doing CPR and managing people in a coronary care unit. You don't want to be that person. So when I see a randomized trial that says sugar increases mortality or avocados, which I hated until I saw a randomized trial saying that it lowered not only LDL, but mortality, all of a sudden my brain craves avocados. That's the way I'm programmed. And I have a handful of patients who are just like that. They're healthcare paranoid people who know that the disease is going to get them, or they really want to optimize their life expectancy and how much living they do during their life, and they'll change in a heartbeat. but everybody else, it's not easy. And so we're going to depend on you to help us with that.
Okay, all right. Do you think that someone with long COVID can change their symptoms by going to a plant-based diet?
So I started to put that in, but I thought I wanted to leave a few minutes, so I didn't put everything in. That was discussed at our medical grand rounds. Long COVID, it's the microbiome. Unbelievable. Okay. And so that's generating it. And so if we fix the microbiome, you see the long COVID symptoms getting substantially better. It's true of multiple sclerosis. It's true of lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Venus Williams and her scleroderma. I'm sorry, Sjogren's syndrome. Everything that's microbiome related, you can improve with a plant-based diet.
Okay. One or two more questions. What are your thoughts on replacing animal protein with the new plant-based meats?
So they're good and bad. I hope everybody, I'm glad you asked that question. Please take a look at them. Every plant-based meat, take it, look at it, flip it over, and read the ingredients. If your saturated fat is going to be more than 10% of your calories, that would be for the average diet, it's about 3.7 grams. The Impossible Burger and the some of the Beyond Meats, not all of them, are above that level. Okay, all of the Impossible meats are, but not all of the Beyond, because they made after I talked to them, actually, they made a specific effort to lower the sodium and lower the saturated fat. So sodium, more than 600 milligrams, I would avoid it unless that's all the sodium you're going to get that day. So please take a look at it. The other thing about Impossible Burger is that it has heme iron. Heme iron was called out by the NHAARP study as one of the things that was associated with coronary heart disease. And so even though it's GMO heme iron, I don't know that it's not dangerous because the NIH said it was. So I would be very careful. Watch the sodium, watch the saturated fat. If those are okay, I like plant-based meat, great. But I'm not going to eat the high sodium or the saturated fat.
Okay. What about protein? I always hear that vegans don't get enough protein.
Yeah, so first of all, it's completely not true. There's protein in almost every plant. And people who know any mammalian biology will not say that. Because when you ask a cow or a horse, where are you getting your protein? And those mammals are absolutely huge, and they have huge muscles. So I'm actually, one of those movies you mentioned was The Game Changers. It talks specifically about that. Now, I differ with the game. Even though I'm in the movie, I didn't write the script or anything. I differ with them a little bit. There was one trial that said that muscle building was exactly the same. They gave you a lot of anecdotes in the movie, but not a lot of trial evidence. The trial evidence said that they're the same. But when you look at the statistics, the ratio of thigh muscle buildup was about 1.2 in favor of eating meat protein. Now, the interesting part is that the standard deviation was wide, and so it didn't reach statistical significance. But it's because the N was small. So any closet statistician like myself will say, I bet that hazard ratio is real. So what did I do? I'm not going to eat meat and die or trying to get big muscles. I don't do sets of 10 anymore. I do sets of 12, just increase it by 20%. And so you really can get enough protein from beans, grains, nuts, and seeds. And there's no reason to ruin your health or the health of the planet or the health of that poor animal that really doesn't want to give you its life so that you can develop heart disease and die.
Sure. One last question. What's your favorite vegan recipe?
Oh, my goodness. I would say, oh, she's not here, not listening. Anything that Rose makes, she does a wonderful job. Any whole food, plant-based diet. And it really is, with me, my tastes are programmed for randomized trials. So I guess if I had to pick one thing that I make, it's blackened asparagus. That actually was in the U of L newsletter where I was trying to cook some asparagus and got a page to this coronary care unit. Next thing you know, after going through this case, the smoke alarm is going off, and I'm running into the kitchen and putting out the fire. I ate it anyway, and it was incredible. So now I actually on purpose make blackened asparagus by putting it in the broiler. It tastes incredible. So hope you all try it. I think they'll put the recipe in that newsletter.
Good. Dr. Williams, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Thank you. All
Thanks.
right.
All righty. Well, I hope you enjoyed the final session of today. Come back tomorrow as we have a full slate of exceptional presenters prepared to advance us into the field of aging. Please remember to complete the survey after each session, especially if you need CEU credits. You have been provided a personalized link that you will use throughout the conference to complete your evaluation for each session and the conference as a whole. Please check your email. Also, the optimal aging session survey must be completed after every session, including the last session of each day, in order to earn your CEUs. Don't forget to go to the exhibit hall to learn more about our sponsors and our exhibitors and to thank them for our support. Also, there's a scavenger hunt aligned with the exhibit hall that can be put you in a position to earn some really good prizes. You can learn about the scavenger hunt and many other conference activities by checking out the navigator bar in the conference foyer. And don't forget about the networking opportunities. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow for our second day of our conference. We will begin with our general session featuring Sandy Markwood, CEO of U.S. Aging, and Bob Blancato, longtime advocate for aging services in America. Our very own Barbara Gordon will interview them about the future of aging policy in America and how they may impact our ability to care for the mind, the body, and the soul as we age. There will be several more opportunities for breakout sessions and networking, and we will conclude the conference with Dr. Anna Fall facilitating a conversation with some of our former Gold Standard Award winners. Hopefully, we will see all of you tomorrow, and we hope you have a very good supper. Maybe some charred asparagus. Thanks.
Plant-based. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.